So I just give you a huge warm welcome. How big a warm welcome can I give to you all, to Coffee Buddies, that community that welcomes everybody, and basically goes on for the length of time it takes us to drink a warm coffee. And we try to entertain, engage and inform, and we're very lucky today to have our special guest, Ian Rees. Ian is a regulator, works for MHRA, is in charge of the innovation group. I've known Ian a while, and he's a fellow Royal Veterinary College guy, so I love him even more. And Ian, welcome to Coffee Buddies, and maybe you just say who you are and what you do, Ian.
Sure, thank you very much, Tony. Thanks for the kind introduction. Yes, it's a sort of a secret that I managed to keep for most of the time, that I'm actually a veterinarian by background. So I appreciate, Kirsten, that you're a doctor but don't see people, and I'm a vet and I don't see animals. So I'm sure the animals are eternally grateful that I'm no longer a practicing vet. So yes, I've been at the agency for what I think is not really a very long time, but it's actually nearly 20 years. So maybe it's time to move on, I don't know. But in that time, so my background is really as a GMP inspector within the agency. And then more recently, I've been lucky enough to look after the innovation office, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But it essentially, you know, the expression riding on the shoulders of giants, it's a bit like that. So you get to see all the interesting, good stuff. So before that, I used to work actually for the Veterinary Medicines Directorate. So in the UK, we have a separate human and veterinary agency. So I was there for a couple of years, and then was in industry for 14 years, where having left the veterinary profession, I became, well, I went into industry with a professor from Bart's Hospital, and we set up a diagnostics company. Then we accidentally set up a pharmaceutical company, and then set up another one after that. So, and then after that, I think the expression is poacher turned gamekeeper. So I left being regulated to do the regulating, and now hopefully ending up doing something, you know, supporting innovation, which is the kind of main thrust of what I want to talk about.
Fantastic. So Ian, you've got a few insights to share with us. So maybe we can, Graham, we can get the
That's right. I've made Ian host, so he can share his screen.
So hopefully this will start coming up.
Fantastic. So brilliant, Ian. Maybe you could kick us off.
Yeah.
Widen the screen. Yeah.
Let me just see. Can you see that okay?
We can, but that's right. We can see the rest of your screen as well. So we've got the presentation. That's perfect.
That's
great.
That's
great.
Perfect.
Okay. So for those that don't really know the, let me just see where we are. There we go. Okay, so for those that don't know the agency, so we're primarily based in London. We still are there, except we don't actually go there any longer like everybody else. And so we've got this, what looks like a bit of an ivory tower in Canary Wharf. So that's a government workplace, one of these hubs. And there are, I think in that sort of silvery building in the front there, the ivory colored building, there's probably nearly 7,000 employees there from revenue and customs and all sorts of different parts of government. We're actually on the top floor, and that's our main base, but we've also got another major section out north of London in Potters Bar. So you can see a little aerial shot of that, and that's called NIBS, the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control. And you can see from the text that we look after medicines, but also medical devices and blood for transfusion. So we're approximately 1,300 staff altogether. So I think by European standards, a fairly big regulator, not quite so big by.
Just Ian, as we go, does it feel like you're in the civil service? Does it feel like that?
I think so. Yes, it's a bit of a culture shock when you join the government. It is when you move in from industry. It's a different frame of reference, but I think very important to have seen both sides of the table. And yes, you have all the kind of government bureaucracy, but you try and keep it to what's necessary, so you can actually keep things moving. And I think we'll try and draw a few lessons learned towards the end of COVID, because it brings together a lot of what the MHRA is trying to do. And I think maybe they could summarize it in one shocking regulatory concept called being helpful. And maybe that's a novel idea, I don't know. But
just one last question before we move on. Is there a culture to it? A bit like, you know, an intrinsic culture that you can feel, in other words, that, you know, this is the way we behave, or is it something that's much more fluid?
You're absolutely right. I think, like every organization, every department has a different culture. So NIBS, which is more research focused, and so it has a different culture, but then a different part of it, which produces biological reference standards, has a different culture. Within the Inspectorate, so just to give you a little background of the structure and how the cultures vary. So there's 3 centers, NIBS is one. The main bit that I'm going to talk about, the regulatory center, which is where I live, has a different culture. And then within that, there's the main licensing division, which looks after the clinical trials unit and the marketing authorizations. That's slightly different to, say, the Inspectorate. So we come in 5 different flavors, but we're the ones that end up on site with clipboards and all the rest of it. And so, yeah, it's a different culture, because you have to engage with people and there are immediate issues to deal with. But there's a kind of underlying government way of doing things, but then you have to adapt that. So when you're out at site, you know, the work is different, the pace is different, the way you interact is different. So, and I think thanks for that, Tony. I'll come back to culture, because I think that's really important, not just at the agency, but within the pharma industry as well. So just then, I started talking about the structure of the agency, and I'll kind of boil it down to the innovation office. So I mentioned NIBS, which is the one that's sited out north of London near Potters Bar. So a couple of hundred people there, 250 people, and that does some basic research. It certainly is involved in the WHO reference standards for flu vaccines and so on. It's the official medicines control laboratory, so it does testing on blood products and vaccines to release them into the UK. So it does those sort of things. So that's one of the centres. The other one is the CPRD, Clinical Practice Research Data Link, which is really looking at collecting anonymized patient data and supporting clinical studies. And then the main bit, which is where I live, is the regulatory centre. So we look after devices, medicines, and blood for transfusion. And specifically, then I'm in the inspection, enforcement, and standards division. And I would say that the enforcement bit, which are ex-police officers, has a different culture again. So making covert purchases and knocking down doors and things like that when there's some misdemeanors to be stopped. So I guess we're heading towards what I would like to convey is maybe some learning points from COVID. And so if I begin that with just building you a picture of perhaps how we see things in supporting the translational piece across the life cycle. So if you look at the technology readiness levels and then overlay onto that some of the major phases of the medicines development, so from discovery, preclinical, and so on. And traditionally, well, this is where legislation bites. It only comes in part way through the translational pathway. So, you know, safety studies, GLP, sites, and so on. And it moves then forward through inspection of facilities, assessment for clinical trial applications, and marketing authorizations. We also happen to have the British Pharmacopoeia embedded within the agency as well. So that's the kind of traditional place, if you like, for a regulator. But what we have is, and was mentioned earlier on, is the Innovation Office. We also have a horizon scanning group as well. And that's key, I think, because what that does, it fills the gap to the left of where the medicines legislation kicks in. So it goes right back to the discovery phase, wherever that happens, whether it be in pharma, academia, hospitals, and so on. And I'll explain a little bit more, but that's where the real left field thinking really is, in academia and in hospitals, where there are no preconceptions. And I think there's nothing that drives you more than you have a patient in front of you with no suitable treatment or device. And that really, as I say, generates some left field thinking. And that innovation office really bridges that gap. And I think from a selfish perspective, it helps the agency as well, because it really does give you that early heads up of what sort of things are happening. And it's a kind of horizon scanning system, if you like. And the idea then is that this is a smooth landing, an easy pathway into the regulated space, where you begin to see things like scientific advice, inspections, and so on. I think, sure.
Just as a proportion of numbers of people in that innovation office, is it very, very few people compared to the later stages, or is it starting to get a reasonable number?
Right. So the innovation office has really a very small number, just a few people who mostly run it and administer it, and then a couple of people like myself who help to direct where the innovations go. But what we do then is to draw in so depending what the inquiry is, we draw in people from preclinical, from clinical trials, from marketing authorizations, so that they begin then to provide the advice and start that engagement process. So it's not like we have a separate set of people purely in the innovation office. The small numbers of us that are pretty much permanently there are there to engage the rest of the agency and start that engagement process. And that, so if you like, in terms of actual static numbers, in terms of the licensing division, that's the biggest part of the agency. That has about nearly 300 people. So that's where the bulk of the work is, assessing marketing authorization applications and variations to those. And then the next biggest is clinical trials. For inspections, we have roughly about 70 people, 70 inspectors across the different inspectorates. Most of those are in manufacturing and distribution, but others then in clinical trials and pharmacovigilance. So you'll see as you move from left to right, you begin then to move into the more formalized, structured part of the agency. So inspections and assessment, but scientific advice. And then as you move further to the right, there's this system.
One question, Ian. I mean,
sure.
One of the questions that I think is always intriguing to people, scientific advice. How does the agency keep fresh enough to give that advice? Because, on one side, you've got many of us are tackling impossible, cutting edge stuff that we're trying to fathom out.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you've got sort of the efferent. On the efferent side, you've got this people who are saying, well, I'm going to give you advice. So I suppose my question is how do you keep up to date?
Yeah. I think there's a mixture of things. So by being in it, and I think being involved in international fora, so you get to see what's going on through ICH, for example. But I think it's literally by being involved in new things. So there was an advert which I saw years and years ago, which I can't now remember what the hell it was for, but I remember it basically, the sort of catchphrase was, times change, values don't. And I think you can adapt that to regulation. Times change, but principles don't. So the core principles that it's got to be safe, it's got to be of the appropriate quality, and it's got to work, and you've got to manufacture it consistently. Those don't change, but what they look like is different in different situations. So for example, if you've got advanced therapy medicinal products, or cell and gene therapy, tissue engineered products, it looks very different to, say, microbiome transplant. Very, very different. And sometimes even companies who come to us can't make the change. So we had one company who was making these fecal microbiome products, and they were quite cross when they found they were medicinal products, and they said, well, we're going to make these sterile. And I said, why are you doing that? And he said, well, all medicines are sterile, aren't they? And I said, have you ever had a tablet? Creams? No, they're not. And I said, if you made it sterile, would it work? He said, no, of course it wouldn't. So, they were kind of adapting, or not very well, traditional medicines thinking to some new area. So, we almost had to educate them and say, well, you need to do what's appropriate for your product. So it does challenge us to think differently, but it's a challenge, I think, for organizations that are coming to market with new products. What we do link with, so that was a slightly insular view of the translational pathways. If you then overlay, so I haven't put in all the organizations, but from a UK perspective, what you have here is the UK Research and Innovation. So that's the overall body that sits above the Medical Research Council, the Biotechnology, BBSRC, and the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. So there's a whole range of research councils that we engage with. They also oversee Innovate UK. So those research councils are at very early stage. Innovate UK, slightly later stage grants. They also link into the Catapult network. So these are kind of midway along the translation. NIHR, who look after and facilitate trials within the NHS. And then as you move progressively further along, the health technology body, NICE, and then later on into the NHS. So we then link across, if I can call it an ecosystem, from very early stage work through to later stage, because there's no point getting a marketing authorization if nobody's going to pay for it or buy it. So you need to know that there's a value there that somebody will pay for. While that's not our job, that's part of the ecosystem, and we're working increasingly closely with all of these to make it more of an integrated pathway.
And is that an organizational nightmare, to bring parties? Because at the end of the day, it's emails and telephone calls. That's really
yes, that's right. But it's actually, well, it was up until about February, March meetings as well. And yes, so we say organizational opportunities, shall we say? They are challenges because, again, different companies have different cultures and different ways of doing things. And if what you're paid to do is to do a certain amount of work per day, per week, and so on, the last thing you want to do is distract yourself by talking to others like the medicines regulators or whatever. But actually, if that's useful and it helps flow things through much more quickly, then that's an overall benefit. And sometimes there's a tension between short-term, easily measured objectives and longer-term outcomes, which sometimes are more difficult to measure and therefore manage. But so this is a transition that the MHRA is going through, and we are working closely. So, for example, you can get joint scientific advice between MHRA and NICE, because if you know what you need to do in your clinical trials, and that will then support the evidence base for a valuation that is favorable, gives NICE the evidence they want all at the same time. You then don't have to stop and repeat things. It's all done at the same time. And then there's an international perspective. So I think MHRA, out of my experience of dealing with a lot of the EU regulators, is a lot of them are very fixated on the here and now, but MHRA has always been pretty internationally connected. So PICS, for example, or PICS as the US tends to refer to it, is the Pharmaceutical Inspectors Cooperation Scheme. So 53 participating authorities. And MHRA was a founder member back in 1971. So although I've been at the agency a long time, I haven't been there that long. So we participate, well, up until now, we have participated in ICH through the EU. We'll be doing that differently in the future. We're not quite sure exactly what that looks like. Sorry, this is a bit of an acronym fest. So ICMRA, I'm not sure if some folks will know that. That's the, this could be a pub quiz actually, not a very good one. The International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Agencies. Yeah. So I think there's something in excess of 30 international authorities. So most, but not all EU are in that. There's US, China, Japan, there's a whole variety of authorities, and also WHO. Bilateral agreements, the MHRA has agreements with a lot of different agencies. This is partly from a regulatory perspective, could be pharmacopeal agreements, also enforcement agreements, because there's a lot of counterfeit stuff that gets routed around the world, so we need agreements with those. So we're fairly plugged in, and this is becoming obviously increasingly important as we move to a different relationship with a lot of these. So I think that's quite a nice way of sort of encapsulating that translational pathway and how we're trying to reach back upstream, you know, to the discovery. And I think what it does as well is, let's say, in addition to giving us that horizon scanning, I think it, you know, this shocking concept that I mentioned of being helpful, because you can help people by classifying, well, this is a medicine, or it's not a medicine, it's a device, or it's a transplant, or it's a transfusion. That matters because the regulatory pathway ahead of you is different. But I think also what we're trying to do is to give it some value. So if you then go to a venture capitalist or you know, a big pharma company, then at least your project or proposal, could be a new product, could be a new assay, could be a new process, has some credibility and would help then with any kind of due diligence. So this is a model that we are working on, and I'm hoping in the next probably month or two, hopefully, that there's a more fundamental reappraisal of these traditional stages that the MHRA can announce to accelerate that development process. I think, you know, it always takes 10 years, 12 years, 15 years to get to market, becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it really, really doesn't have to take that long. And I think that's another aspect that coronavirus can actually inadvertently help us. That's part of the silver lining. So just to talk a little bit about the Innovation Office, so you may have heard of this. So what we're trying to do is to make what is theoretical actually happen, to make an innovation operational. And so say there's a real benefit for us by engaging early, because we get the heads up on what's happening. Now, it may never go all the way through for a variety of reasons, but at least we get to see these things happening. So they're confidential, they're free. And what we're trying to do is to clarify and de-risk. So in that way, then, you can make a clearer decision on whether to invest in a new production line, a new product, a new assay, and so on, because you know what the issues are.
Question, Ian, is how permeable is it between, you know, so, because I mean, often we all of us will have our own regulatory advisors who are advising us as surrogates of the meeting for yourself, and often on the side of the company, you're doing, you know, you're going through huge manifestations of documents, and sometimes you're going through a lot of coaching, a lot of prep work. to then end up with, you know, turning up and then it's Ian I've known for 20 years or something. So it's this thing about how permeable is this relationship between you and because this looks fantastic.
Yeah.
But I'm a bit scared because there's always been this parent-child relationship between us in the industry and regulators.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned culture earlier on, and here's another culture. Perhaps in part to answer that, out of those 1,000+ inquiries that we've had, I don't know if you'd like to hazard a guess how many inquiries have come in from Big Pharma, even to an order of magnitude.
No idea. Very low?
Very, very low. I mean, vanishingly small. So, you know, less than 10. And so, you know, you could say, well, Big Pharma doesn't have any innovations, then that's clearly not true. What I think is truer is that they don't like to bring the innovations to the regulator. And I think this is tradition and culture. Most of the inquiries, and you could think, well, this is really for SMEs and so on who don't have deep pockets or deep regulatory experience. So they can come to us and they have no fear or favor, you know, they come to us and share things. And that's part of the issue that we see is Big Pharma is reluctant to come to us. There's a really nice example of a big company that came to us who wanted to move from batch manufacturing. They had a centrally authorized product. They wanted to move from batch manufacturing to continuous. We had the initial innovation office meeting and they said they'll send us some documents. It took nearly 2 years to get the document from them. And it was French polished to within an inch of its life. It was fantastic. But I think they probably had 80% of that or more at the time, or certainly within a few weeks. But then by the time it had gone around endless iterations of review and legal oversight and so on, it took 2 years to come out. So nothing happened. So they probably lost at least 1.5 years there. Let's say when it came in, it was great. But what they could have done was say to us, right, this is the outline of the project. These are our draft milestones. What do you think? You know, is there something missing? Are we overdoing something? And then to have some tailored meetings, which is what that second bit refers to, and therefore provide that clarification, that de-risk, that certainty at that time. They could then have made a start on that project. And so, you know, that kind of shows the fear, our concern. I think also to your point, Tony, you know, clearly if you've got a big organization, you need some control and structure. You don't want, say you've got 15,000 employees, you don't want all of them contacting regulators because there'd be anarchy. But the Reg Affairs group are often charged with getting things right first time. Absolutely fine. What that tends to drive is a conservatism. So you find that actually the quickest way to market is a manufacturing method and analytics that are long established, because they, you know, will raise no questions or concerns. That's true, but what it does then, it keeps perpetuating what's been there for a long time. The way to draw the sting out of that is to come and actually get this advice upfront to say, have you got any concerns, yes or no, and if they are, what are they? So then they can be addressed well before the application goes in, either even for maybe mid-stage clinical trials, certainly well before the MA. So
there's something you often hear when you try and make mid-pharma and large pharma agile. They say we can't be agile because this is a highly regulated environment, and that sort of almost seems to be an excuse for not doing things differently. And I suppose the question to you, Ian, in a COVID world where it was an existential crisis, you know, we're all trying to think about life differently. It must change the perceptions of what is possible and not possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Because yes, you can be highly regulated, but that doesn't mean everything is set in concrete. And going back to my analogy that times change, but principles don't. So yes, you want to manufacture things in a different way, but they still need to maintain that overall control, the quality, the consistency, and so on. You're just doing it in a different way. It isn't that the regulator won't accept it if it doesn't meet those criteria, but just because it's new doesn't mean it's not acceptable. And I think what the COVID in its various different forms, I've been involved with things like convalescent plasma and vaccines. It's kind of forced a lot of industry to meet the regulators where they would not have done beforehand. And I think they've actually found it, well, almost collegiate, I would hope. You know, it's discursive. And what we differentiate is, say, if you look at that technology readiness pathway, that early stage, it's free, it's informal, and it's what we call regulatory advice. It gets then a little bit more structured and formal as you get into the main stages, as you head towards clinical trials. So you get into scientific advice, which is, we now charge for that, but it's more structured, it's more formal and so on. But if you've done that early discussion, it takes the sting and the fear out of it. It then reduces the swirl of uncertainty. You can then narrow down what is it that's really an issue that remains.
And I
Deal
suppose
with those.
the question that you must be posing is, how innovative is what you're looking at? Because if it's not very innovative, your hurdle is going to be much higher and your collegialness is probably going to be less. But if it's really innovative, and that's maybe where the problems is, you get clustering of many molecules that are in immuno-oncology, and it's too tight for you to be able to differentiate and to say, this is novel, now we need to talk to that group. But sorry, I'm talking too much. I know you've got one more slide.
Sure, no, that's fine. And just to finish off on this slide, I think one of the areas that's important that we strike a balance is, and I was trying to find a way of getting this right. There was, we have annual meetings, presentations from various leaders, and we had one a few years ago which described a schizophrenia for regulators. I think he described it with some relish. And I was trying, and I thought, well, that's what we have in the innovation office. And I was looking for a kind of an analogy for this, and I came up with Goldilocks. I looked up Goldilocks, and there was this thing called the Goldilocks principle. And there you have on the left, which should be a nice yellow thing called a sun, it's too hot. And out on the frozen right, something that's planets that are too cold. And in the middle, the third rock from the sun is the Earth. It's just right. It's just in that zone. And I think that's where the innovation office meetings need to be, and where we've striven to keep them there, close, but not too close. So for example, we're never on the team, so we're not conflicted. There's no what you call regulatory capture. So that's the zone that we operate in, and I think that's real important. Yeah,
yes.
So let me just pull up this slide. So where does this lead us? I think, so in addition then to supporting innovations in industry, and you're right, there are different degrees of innovation. So some things aren't, they may be a bit inventive, but they're not completely new to science, if you like. So the degree of novelty varies, but the more novelty there is, you know, the more you have to go back to fundamental principles. So that's supporting innovations and line extensions in industry. What we're also doing is actually innovations in regulation. So you're probably aware that there's a life sciences industrial strategy that was put out in 2017. And then there've been a couple of sector deals which says, right, this is what government is going to pay for. In that second one, which came out at the end of 2018, there's a section which is a little bit vague, maybe deliberately. It's innovative regulation, which some people might think is an oxymoron. And it's describes this innovative regulation projects, and there are 7 of these. One of them is mine, and what that is, it's about point of care manufacture. So I guess what's hidden in plain sight in many ways is the medicines legislation worldwide is geared for factory-based centralized manufacture. There are some products that we are seeing which I'll give you a really good example because I think it helps to illustrate it. So it's actually a blood product, and it's to treat the diabetic ulcers. I had no idea how big diabetic ulcers could be. I thought they were about as big as a cigarette burn, but some of them you could push a tennis ball into them. They're really huge. Anyway, somebody's come up with an approach for that, which looks quite novel, and it's at clinical trials. But the product has a shelf life of 30 seconds, not 2 years, not 2 months, not even 2 days or 2 hours. It's 30 seconds. It's under a minute. And you cannot make that anywhere else other than the operating theatre. And so now here's a regulatory challenge. How do you regulate manufacture of a medicinal product in the operating theatre?
That's very interesting.
And so that's something that we're grappling with, and a piece of work that I'm leading on. And I guess you're right, Tony. So pulling it all back together, it's almost like Monty Python. What have the Romans ever done for us? What has COVID ever done for us? I think it's actually helped push that relationship further on, so that you can accelerate projects, whether it be from necessity or from previous engagement with us. They've engaged with us either as a consortia through various task forces or on an individual basis to really understand what they have to do and what they don't have to do to really accelerate a lot of these projects, and therefore get some sort of credence. They can then get government money to support that, and that really motors things along. They may yet fail, at clinical trials, and that's what trials are there to do, to find out, are they safe, are they efficacious? But they've gone through the regulatory pathway much faster, and I think that's been a real benefit of
Ian,
coronavirus.
I think we should open ourselves up for questions. Is that
Sure.
your last? Yeah,
That's the last slide. Yes.
Can I just thank you so much? I mean, I think we should open the question, Graham. Maybe we can ask Ian to come off share and bring you back
Yes.
on, Graham.
Yes, Ian, if you can make me host again, that would be great.
Let me.
Just go onto the square in the corner. That's it. Perfect. Yes,
Graham,
we've got first question from Anna. If you'd like to just introduce yourself quickly and then say your question. Somu Wari, how do you say your name? Sorry, if you take yourself off mute.
Oh yeah, I'm on mute, sorry. Somu, yes. My name's Anna, and I've been in regulatory for 16 years now. And the question that I guess is on quite a few people's minds is, when are we going to be told the regulatory pathways for the registration of products in the UK from the 1st of January of 2021?
So I think what's obviously changing is our relationship with the EU. What's not changing is the regulatory pathway. So there will, just as there are now, you can do clinical trials, all the different phases, the preclinical work, and you can apply for marketing authorization. So depending on, I guess the residual uncertainty is exactly how linked that is to the EU system. Because the EU has national, decentralized mutual recognition and centrally authorized systems. It may be, depending on if we don't get to any agreement, there will be simply a national pathway in the UK, hopefully well linked through to NICE and the NHS. But unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball to know how well the negotiations are going at the moment. But the actual basics of the regulatory pathway won't change.
It won't change, okay.
Great, thank you very much. Diane Lee, I believe you got a couple of questions.
Yeah, sorry, too many things to say.
Absolutely fine.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
I don't think we've met before. I've been in regulatory for a long time. So I've got a few questions. My first question was really that the MHRA had such a pivotal role in Europe, and how do you think Europe is going to fill the void when we do completely leave everything? Do you want all the questions at once, or do you want?
I was just making a few notes here. Just
I also
maybe one at a time.
One at a time.
okay,
yeah.
one at a time. Yeah.
okay. So they've been filling the voids. I think so. For example, I was at the EMA we have different committees and organizations. So there's the main scientific committees, CHMP, there's the veterinary one, the orphan one, CAT, and so on. And then underneath that, there's safety working party, several different inspector working parties. So we'd been dumped, I guess. So we weren't invited to a lot of those unless there were items of national interest. So they've been filling that. So I think from a numbers perspective, they've been filling those. What I'm not so sure is whether there's some down-to-earth pragmatism being backfilled as well. I remember half jokingly as a French delegate who asked me, he said, you know, you British are very pragmatic. Do you have an SOP on pragmatism? And I said, I'm really sorry. No, it's just the way we operate. So maybe that void may be so difficult to fill, but I think numbers wise, I think they're finding a way.
Yes. The second one that I was sort of asking was more about MHRA. Do you think more companies are going to come to MHRA for advice now, given Brexit, rather than asking for centralised advice, which encompasses the thoughts of the whole EU? And what are you going to be doing to kind of draw companies in? So you're going to be offering sort of preferential timelines or things like that?
So I think part of it is what I alluded to in the presentation. It's more of a joined up translational pathway, because the regulatory approval is an important mechanism to get to the market, but it's not the only one. You know, you've got to get a health technology approval. You've then, you know, the NHS has got to commission it. It's got to see there's a need for it. And so there was, you probably something that I didn't actually talk about, the Accelerated Access Collaborative, which is meant, because with most of these things, there's a science push from the low technology readiness levels, but there's no commercial pull. So there's got to be both of those to make it a fast pathway. So yes, I think it's a bit of all of those. I think MHRA has always been pretty quick at turning around, say, clinical trial applications and so on. But I think another thing which I part mention, and I can't formally announce because it's, you know, that's for the chief executive to do, but a slightly different way of engaging with translation, leading, you know, building on the innovation office, the kind of early stage informal engagement, then progressively through to scientific advice. And because you've thrashed all the uncertainties out at an early stage, it should make that process go a whole lot quicker. For example, if you're building something, we will bring GMP inspectors in right at the beginning, and they will then see that project all the way through, perhaps with interim inspections, to accelerate the whole project. So
my very last question, I'm sorry, I'm really hogging this today, and I haven't been on for a few weeks. My last question was, is there any way that the MHRA would be able to support companies with something akin to the prime designation in Europe? But from what you're saying, it does sound like that is the way that you're going.
Yeah.
But maybe not quite the same, but prime.
That's right. Yes, you've got prime, you've got breakthrough in the US and so on. Yes, we've got EAMS, the Early Access to Medicine scheme, which is in part, it's not exactly the same, but absolutely. So this is something that, as I say, I'm not authorized to talk about yet because it's not been announced, but a different way of engagement so that you can really work right the way through the system and bring in others who need to be engaged in parallel rather than in series, like the health technology bodies, and to engage with, in our case, the NHS as well. So I think, yes, all of those hopefully will make the UK a more attractive place to come and supply or hopefully manufacture as well.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Michael McQueen.
Hi Ian, thanks very much for a very interesting presentation. Apologies I came in late to it, so you may have
problem.
points I'm about to touch on. I'm working mainly as a BD consultant for early and mid-stage companies, so the early kind of regulatory advice in innovation is very interesting for us. But my past history has been a lot with big pharma. And of course, big pharma is always interested in the big markets. FDA is the primary advice body for many projects in big pharma, and increasingly the Chinese FDA and the Asian markets. I wonder if there's a danger of the MHRA now becoming a third tier because it's only accessing a UK market that maybe is shrinking as the UK National Health Service budget is stretched more and more, and premium pricing is not going to be supported so much. And I wonder if now that we're not a doorway into Europe, we become just, as I say, second or maybe even third tier regulatory advice, and the primary drivers will come from the FDA and maybe the Asian markets and then the European markets.
Yeah, you're right.
Experience of that?
I think, you're right. I think not only is the US a big single market, they will pay premium prices, and I think there's almost a danger in that if the products come to the UK, it kind of sets a benchmark for maybe a lower cost of product, which obviously then would compromise what they would get in the US and so on. I think there's another piece of work that's going on, which is, so in GMP, you're probably familiar with a concept called mutual recognition. There's something similar happening on the assessment side, so that you've got a group of companies like Canada, Australia, Switzerland, or not Switzerland, but a few others who are looking to pool together so that actually between them, you've got a pretty significant market. I mean, you suddenly can't make 300 million or 500 million market, but you can link up with other organizations, other regulators, so that you can suddenly access a range of countries much more easily. So I think it's not a complete answer, but I think it's certainly something the UK is thinking about.
I'm not sure that recreating a European Union with non-European countries is going to be the answer to.
No.
We really need to be keeping aligned with the regulatory pathways in the FDA and especially within Europe.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a struggle to be in Europe without being in Europe.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is that I guess being part of a smaller team, you can actually move faster. So it isn't always the case that it's keeping up with FDA. In fact, some of the regulatory innovations may come elsewhere because FDA is a big beast. It's a big organization, and maybe innovations don't happen so quickly, but obviously they're very impactful when they do happen.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just a last comment on that. It's great to be innovative and maybe be a doorway to allow new type of therapy in. But if ultimately that doesn't then translate directly into access to the FDA market, the US market, I still think companies will tend to take the FDA advice and the slower pathway.
Yes, and we'll certainly do what we can to be competitive and of interest.
Great, thank you very much. The next question is for Anna Litsu.
Yes.
Anna, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, and thank you very much. Yeah, I think my question was like, to keep, and what the previous speaker was asking, to stay more, competitive. Do you think with the new therapies like gene therapy, etc., it could become, for MHRA really leading the way to like not lower the standards, but as what you said, become more flexible? Because what we see, as you said, Europeans are much more slow. Like as for example, in oncology, they don't accept phase 2 open label single arm, but the US FDA where usually pivots on the top of the regulatories, they're ahead because they're more flexible conditionally. So do you think for us really to compete, MHRA could be more ahead with the new technologies, more flexible, and really be the go-to country?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yes, you're right. I mean, I think what you need to do is to look carefully at the science and the risks. Is it a one-to-one risk? Is it a one-to-many risk? And to base it on good science and have some proportionate oversight as opposed to always a one-size-fits-all. And yes, we can, be responsive, so that we can get that information quickly to organizations and to develop that. not just at a particular milestone, but on a more of an ongoing basis, so that people are aware of what the thinking is and what the needs are, what they have to do and what they don't have to do. But yes, basing it on risk and science and, a dose of pragmatism, I think is important. And certainly looking at some of the newer sciences that are coming through on the advanced therapies, that's certainly an area of major focus for us.
Fantastic. Graham, how are we doing for time and how are we doing for questions?
Yeah, we're doing very well. I was just wondering if Tom might like to ask a question. He's often got questions during these meetups. How are you feeling today, Tom? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you very much, Ian. What has gone on in the past, with the MHRA and, what you've basically put together with regard, to, the innovation side, I applaud. My concerns really are where we're going, because there's so much uncertainty. And I think you can appreciate that from the questions that you've, been asked already. And, my concern is that in the past, I registered compounds, for first-in-man studies with the MHRA, but opened up an IND in the US. Now, my sort of question is, is that going to be still acceptable in the future?
Yeah, I think there's, quite a bit of, so one of the agreements that we have, so I was talking about these national agreements that we had. We've had one in place with the FDA for quite a long time. We've got a lot of close working with the FDA, and we're looking to build up on that. So we're not necessarily paddling our own canoe separately, but maybe linking more closely with FDA. So we do a lot of joint inspection work. There's a lot of joint GCP work. There's increasingly more pharmacovigilance work. So I think in a way, if we're less tied to Europe, then it gives us an opportunity to form closer relationships with FDA. So it won't necessarily be, there's a market of 300 million and here's a market of 60 million. Maybe it's closer working so that you could access both simultaneously. Who knows where it'll go, but that's the opportunity, and that's what we're looking to do. We didn't choose to be leaving Europe from a regulator's perspective. Obviously the country did, but let's make the best of the opportunities that are there, and so that something can come to the UK as fast as it's coming to the US ideally.
Mm-hmm.
It was
just thinking about time, Graham.
Yeah, we might have a chance just to squeeze in one final question from Sue Jackson, and then we'll have to say goodbye.
Yes, Sue. Where's Sue?
Oh, you're still on mute.
No, here we go.
There we go.
Thank you, Ian, for that. Thank you very much. The FDA has been pouring through the emergency use authorizations for the COVID diagnostics. Is that good or bad? Is anything we can learn from that? Yeah,
I mean, what we've tried to do in the UK is to put as much through clinical trials or clinical studies. I say that because we've got things like convalescent plasma, which isn't a medicine. So it's going through studies to try and get as much structured data as possible. And that's the risk. Either people don't want to be in a trial because they may not get what they consider the actual material. So for whatever reason, there's an opportunity lost there. Yes, it's got advantages in speed and access and certainty, but you don't then get the good scientific data to say, is this a good intervention? Is it safe? Does it provide some long-term satisfactory outcomes? So I can only talk in general terms, but you're right that that's something we've struggled with a little bit, and we have erred on the side of formalized, structured studies, which take a little bit longer, but in the end get better data out of it. So yes, I'm certainly aware of that.
I think Ian and all, I think it's
Thank you.
time to
Thanks,
wrap
Ian.
up. Graham, is it? It's time to wrap up.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's time to wrap up.
Give a big thank you to Ian. If everyone can give him the
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
You're fab, Ian, and what we really appreciate your hard work to get earlier in the process, and we do wish you the best, and we also look forward to maybe inviting you back in a few months when some more things may have come out. Can I just thank everyone and just ask Graham, what have we got to look forward to in the next one, Graham?
So the next one, Tuesday the 9th of June, we are talking about speaking to the media. So we've got Suzanne Elveridge, who's a journalist, and we have Richard Hayhurst, who's a PR agent. They'll be putting their views forward on that. So that's going to be very interesting. And then we have Denise Scott Knight on Thursday from Morono Biopharma. She's just raised a $70 million private placement in the last couple of days. So it's going to be really good to have her on the show too.
So thanks again, Ian. Thanks all, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Please, Ian, join us in the future. And
Will do.
To everyone, thanks again. Be careful out there, and bye for now.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.